Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Life Show. Happy Tuesday and week 4, everybody. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz. It's a great day to be great, and it's a great day to break down everything we learned from Monday Night Football, the Sheesh Report, and of course, the award-winning Utilization Report presented by none other than Fantasy Life's finest and my co-host today, Dwain "The Rock" McFarland. Dwain, 128 points in the Monday Night Football doubleheader. Scoring is back.
Yeah, man. Josh Allen and Jaden Daniels here to save the narrative around scoring being down. How much did that actually move the needle? I think this was the worst week. I think we got worse. Week 1 down to week 2, week 3. Maybe that got us to close to neutral. Probably not. We were probably still down for week 3 for scoring, but it was a nice try by Josh Allen. No thanks to you, Trevor Lawrence. No thanks to you, though.
No thanks to T-Law. And with that, guys, let's get right into our Monday Night Football recap, starting with that beatdown in Buffalo. Bills took down the Jaguars 47-10. So I will say, I know everyone's on the top of your mind. Yes, my Dachshund Lily went 0-2 in her picks. That freaking idiot dog took the Jaguars and the Bengals, Dwain. I knew something was wrong when she was picking the cats out there. But anyway, back to stuff that matters. Josh Allen, not 1, not 2, not 3, 4 touchdowns through the air. Each of Khalil Shakir, Dalton Kincaid, Keon Coleman, and Ty Johnson managed to get one. James Cook also 87 total yards and a touchdown. Dropped a 28-yard touchdown, but Dwain, you know what? You got to be pretty freaking good to be in a position to drop a touchdown in the first place in the professional football. Trevor Lawrence, as we mentioned, just 178 yards. Bad interception, also took 4 sacks. Christian Kirk did have 8 catches for 79 yards, but would have been a lot cooler if he didn't let a potential 12-yard touchdown hit him in the face mask. So again, Dwain, those were the top performers. I'm sure most of us out there watched it, but to me, the most fantasy relevant takeaway here is what to make of this Bills wide receiver room. Did not see Keon Coleman out there to start the game, and we found out later that was because of a timing issue. Apparently, he's been showing up late to things. So, please don't do that, Keon. But what did we see overall from a, evolving group of wide receivers for Buffalo, Dwain?
Yeah, just a massive rotation. Even once you just only look at the snaps where Josh Allen was in the game, you get rid of Mitchell Trubisky's playing time at the end. And it's just a situation where we don't have any of these wide receivers right now, Ian, at least for this last week, that were up to like an 80% route participation. We'll see if that returns for Keon Coleman. He had been at 90% the first 2 games, only 32% this last game, though. So that was more than just, you just got benched for a little bit of the game. I think there's potentially going to be a loss of playing time for him. The good news for Keon Coleman is Mac Hollins with his additional playing times. He didn't earn any additional targets. Marquez Valdez-Scantling with his additional playing time, a 7% target share. So the door is still open there for Keon Coleman. The big name for me, Ian, is really Khalil Shakir. He looks like the best wide receiver on this team. But even for him last night, on the plays with Josh Allen, only a 68% route participation. The week before, he had jumped up to 85% after being 70% in week 1. We had talked about him a little bit in the utilization report. We wrote about him in the rankings risers. He ended up coming through for you because he had 72 yards and a touchdown. When you watch it, again, he looks like he's clearly the best player, Ian, but they're not willing to give him that 80, 90% route participation we're looking for. I still think he is the best player to roster from this passing group. Hopefully the role expands. We also haven't seen, a situation very often where the Bills are really getting challenged here. Okay, so maybe if we can get some games where teams can respond, they're not in a complete blowout, maybe that helps Khalil Shakir as well. So I think he is the guy to roster, but it's hard for me to upgrade him. I would love to upgrade this guy and say, hey, look, he's locked into wide receiver 3 territory. We're thinking about moving to wide receiver 2 if he has another good game. But because of this, he's like a borderline wide receiver 3.
I mean, he's only got 14 targets in 3 games, and he's making the most out of them. I mean, even for a guy who's not very big and not very fast, man, the dude is a complete beast after the catch out there. But yeah, as we're seeing, similar to kind of the post-Tyreek Hill Chiefs offenses, Josh Allen and company content to spread the ball around in Buffalo. And why wouldn't it be number 1 scoring offense in the NFL through 3 weeks of action? Also, Dwain had a far more competitive and, arguably entertaining game going on in our Monday Night Football doubleheader. The Commanders took down the Bengals 38-33. First game since 1940 with no turnovers or punts. What a time to be alive. So in this one, Dwain, Jaden Daniels, now the QB2 in Fantasyland, 254 yards and 2 touchdowns, only 2 incompletions on the evening. Got mad at one of them, had a wide open Terry McLaurin for a potential 35-yard touchdown, threw it about 35 yards over his head, but more than made up for it again with some truly awesome downfield dimes later in the game. So I mentioned Terry, 100 yards and a touchdown. Eckler Eckler and Brian Robinson also had touchdowns for Washington. Really was a great performance from a group that, let's face it, some of the Cliff Kingsbury slander and stuff we've been dishing his way over the last few weeks, at least for one Monday night, certainly made up for it there. So quickly on the Bengals, Joe Burrow did his best Andy Dalton impression, threw for 324 yards and 3 touchdowns, 2 of which were pearls down the sideline to Jamar Chase, who really had his first breakout game of the season with 118 yards. Got to appreciate the Commanders always being there for struggling offenses to find their stride against. So Zach Moss also had 97 total yards and a touchdown. Only real bust was T. Higgins, just 39 scoreless yards, but I will note almost had a touchdown and another acrobatic 30-yard catch down the sideline. That, again, only got 1 foot down in bounds. So, yeah, wasn't a catch, but oh so close to having a much bigger day in the box score. But, Dwain, let's focus on a situation that is actively involving, because we did have an injury out there. This Washington Commanders backfield, Austin Eckler looking unlikely now for week 4 as he is in the concussion protocol. So Brian Robinson, someone who's been really impressive this season. I mean, 4 yards after contact per carry, tied for the best mark among all running backs. And Dwain, I think he is someone who can catch the ball, albeit not as good as Eckler. So if we do see Eckler out of the picture, how high is too high to rank Brian Robinson?
Well, we did see last night they were willing to get Jeremy McNichols out there kind of playing that Austin Eckler role. So I don't think it will 100% go to Brian Robinson, but it will be an upgrade. I do think that Brian Robinson will pick up additional pass down duties if we're without Eckler due to the concussion. We'll see what happens with that. But playing on Monday night, I would probably lean in towards, Austin Eckler not getting to play next week. We do see some of these guys on Sunday. It used to be if you had a concussion, like you just played the next week. Then it became, you have a concussion, you're pretty much not playing the next week. And then last year, it kind of got back into a little bit of a gray area where some of these players would be ready to go, some wouldn't be. Maybe it was because you were a quarterback or not. Maybe that had something to do with it. I'm not gonna get into all that right now. But if we don't have Eckler, yeah, Brian Robinson would get an upgrade. I would say borderline. I haven't looked at this week's matchup, but borderline running back 1 just based on utilization alone.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a really hard time, ranking 15 running backs ahead of Brian Robinson this week. But yeah, the star of the evening was, of course, Jayden Daniels. Got his first career touchdown pass. Going to be a fun trivia question in a few years because it was none other than Trent Scott. I believe the stat was he was the first-round QB whose first touchdown was to an offensive lineman since J.P. Losman back in the day. So most fantasy points this season at the position, Dwain, Josh Allen, and number 2, Jayden Daniels. So yeah, I think, a certain someone here who basically based their entire quarterback draft strategy around getting Jayden Daniels is pretty happy, Dwain.
Yeah, I'm very happy. And I'm happy for the people that got to draft him. I will say this, we take our lumps, we don't get everything right. But I will say Malik Neighbors, Rashee Rice, and Jayden Daniels, we did really pump those players up. They were our top 3 guys we talked about the most throughout the offseason. So you're looking pretty good. But the big thing here with Jayden Daniels, Ian, and we've talked about it, this is why we said you've got to draft him, because even if he's not a good passer in year 1, which we're now getting glimpses of, maybe he is going to be, like you mentioned, dropping those dimes down the field. It's the scramble rate, man. 17%. That's number 1 in the NFL right now. So he is taking these plays that often turn into throwaways. They turn into just little checkdowns for other quarterbacks, or they end up getting sacked. This guy's taking off and getting you, 2 fantasy points on a 20-yard scramble instead. And that's really huge. And then if you look at his involvement in the design run game, 25%, Ian. That's one I don't think that we even thought he would get to. We thought he'd be more probably in that 17, 18, 19%, maybe get 20% of the carries, but he's up there in the Jalen Hurts range. And so with him getting all these carries inside the 5-yard line, those are turning into touchdowns. We saw another one last night. You'd already ran it in with the running back twice in the game, and now you do the fake and he just walks into the end zone. So yeah, Jayden Daniels looking absolutely phenomenal. Really good to see this passing game now taking the shots down the field. Maybe the whole first 2 weeks was just to set everything up so Cam Taylor-Britt would open his mouth and Cliff Kingsbury could come out with his Mickey Mouse college offense, Ian, and just burn the freaking Bengals down the field.
You notice where Terry McLaurin was lined up on that game-sealing touchdown, Dwain?
On the right side, not the left.
What a concept. Yes. What an idea.
He was in the slot 2 plays before. I was like, wow, what's happening?
He had season high marks in the slot and on the right side. Lo and behold, look what happens when you move, your number one wide receiver around just a little bit. But again, you mentioned not dinking and dunking as much, Dwayne, and we did see that. Jaden Daniels, 5.6 yard average target depth in week 1, 5.3 in week 2, 9.7 on Monday Night Football. So only Lamar Jackson right now has more, overall rushing yards than Jaden Daniels among all QBs. Looking pretty sweet. I mean, at this point, Dwayne, top 5, top 6 quarterback the rest of the way for Jaden Daniels. I mean, I feel like we've seen far more out of him than Anthony Richardson. I know that bar isn't high, but still.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's matching Anthony Richardson, step for step. Actually, he's ahead of him rushing as well. But I think we know Richardson's going to end up doing his thing on the ground at some point this year. But yeah, he's a far better passer. I mean, Anthony Richardson, he hasn't completed over 50% of his passes in any game. Like, I mean, come on. Like, it's a major challenge. So, yeah, Jaden Daniels is clearly ahead of Anthony Richardson at this point. So I would say Jalen Hurts still ahead. Lamar Jackson, out of respect for being Lamar Jackson, still ahead. Obviously, Josh Allen is still ahead. I think that's where it starts
Mahomes
to get
versus
interesting. I know. It gets really interesting there because we have not seen the step forward from the Kansas City passing attack that we thought we were going to see because Xavier Worthy's not doing his part. He's not. We just basically it's the check down show to Rashee Rice, which is great if you have Rashee Rice. But man, like, are we really sure that the Kansas City passing offense is going to be better than it was last year? At this point, I think we have to say we don't know.
Certainly going to be one of our bigger questions that we're going to be asking on the Wednesday edition of this show. But for now, going to move on and get through some of the rest of the news from Tuesday and then into our utilization and sheesh goodness. So quickly, guys, going to rapid fire go through some of the injury headlines from a busy Monday. And believe me, there were a lot. Brock Purdy is dealing with back soreness and is considered day-to-day, but the MRI did come out clean, which is good. More good news, Sam Darnold with his knee and Justin Herbert with his ankle. Hey, Darnold not expecting to miss any time, and Herbert, at least his x-rays came back negative. We'll see how he continues to play through the pain. Jordan Love will begin this week limited at practice per head coach Matt LaFleur, and the Raiders are sticking with Gardner Minshew over Aiden O'Connell, even though Antonio Pierce said he was not initially ruling out a quarterback change. At running back, Christian McCaffrey seeing a specialist in Germany about his lingering Achilles tendonitis issue. Maybe he's getting that Kobe treatment from back in the day, getting some stem cells, but either way, not exactly the best news that CMC fantasy managers wanted to hear. Trouble in Paradise, aka Pittsburgh. Najee Harris had a sling on his right arm, and Jalen Warren getting an MRI on his knee. Is that Cordero Patterson's music? You could imagine. At wide receiver, Sean McVay has already rolled out Cooper Kupp for Sunday's matchup against the Bears. Devonta Smith is in a concussion protocol. Adam Thielen is expecting to miss some time with a hamstring injury, and Jordan Addison remains day-to-day with the ankle. At tight end, Trey McBride in the concussion protocol. Sam Laporta dealing with a low ankle sprain per head coach Dan Campbell. And then, my God, Dwayne, we have offensive line injuries all over the place. Lions all-pro center Frank Ragnow week to week with a partially torn pec. Chargers offensive tackle Joe all expecting to miss some time with an MCL sprain. Rashawn Slater also hurt. Chargers are turning into a walking graveyard. Browns guard Wyatt Teller expecting to miss around 4 weeks. Hardly ideal for one of the worst offensive lines and most injured in the league at the moment. And the Falcons could be without 2 of their starters in right tackle Caleb McGarry and center Drew Dahlman. Final few notes, Chargers safety Derwin James got suspended for 1 game. You'll never guess who the Chargers have to play this week. Helmet-to-helmet hit with Freiermuth over the middle. And additionally, 49ers defensive tackle Javon Hargrave, Lions pass rusher Marcus Davenport, and Raiders safety Marcus Epps all out for the season with various injuries. So that was the news, everybody. But before we get to the Sheesh Report, a quick word to our friends over at Experian. Experian is to your finances what FantasyLife is to your fantasy league. It is a tool and resource designed to make your life easier. And accordingly, the Experian app is free to download and serves as a one-stop shop for managing your financial health. With so many spending and subscription details to track, let Experian handle it for you. They'll help you find and cancel your unwanted or forgotten subscriptions, helping you save money and focus on what really matters, winning your fantasy league. Download the Experian app today. Just note results will vary. Not all subs are eligible. Savings not guaranteed. Paid membership with connected payment account is required, and see Experian.com for details. Sheesh is right, Dwain. Welcome to the Week 3 Sheesh Report presented by Mike's Hard Lemonade. And boy, it was a sheeshy Week 3, Dwain. So, the biggest sheesh of the week, honestly, has to go to Devin Singletary for, putting his real life team ahead of his fantasy managers and icing the game at the 1 yard line, a la Brian Westbrook and Todd Gurley amongst, other players over the years. Nick Chubb had a, big one back in the day as well. So we had that going on. But really, Dwain, one of the things we'd like to highlight that is more fantasy relevant, unrealized air yards, which again are basically tracking the total yardage of incomplete targets, help show which guys again were maybe that much closer to having big days in the box score. And Dwain, big 2, had some nice games, but could have been even bigger. Marvin Harrison Jr. with 186 unrealized air yards, and Bears wide receiver Rome Odunze with 160. Especially in Odunze's case, there were a couple bombs where it looked like he had a chance to create some big plays with a bit better throws. So, funny how things can change after a bad 1 week sample for both guys, Dwayne.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about both these guys in the utilization report, but we love when we have these young talents like this, Ian, and they're showing us that not only can, they do it, the 5-10 yards down the field, but they also have that ability to uncork those big plays. And while we don't always get the result we want, the intent is still there. And that's the thing that really matters, that these are the guys that they want to look to down the field. And it's just the nature of the beast to some extent. And you know this because you write this stuff up every single week. Sometimes these connections happen, sometimes they don't. But man, when they do happen, Ian, it leads to absolutely huge box scores for fantasy. So yeah, we'll dive into both these players more. But the big thing is they both have the talent to get this done down the field.
Rounding out the top 10, we have Brandon Ayuk leave a lot of opportunity on the field. Also got tackled at the 1 yard line. Had this one particular deep shot where, he got held by Tre'Davious White. Honestly, that doesn't happen. Accurate pass. We're talking about a 75-yard touchdown for the alleged 49ers wide receiver 1. Also, Rashid Shaheed, more like Rashish Shaheed, Dwayne, because he dropped a 40-yard touchdown. Would have been a lot cooler if Derek Carr threw it a little bit longer, but still hit the man in the chest. Also, Brandon Cooks, Garrett Wilson, Demarcus Robinson, CeeDee Lamb, DeAndre Carter, and yes, even Malik Neighbors had at least 85 unrealized air yards out there. So again, solid performances from a lot of those guys anyway, but could have been that much bigger. Now, Dwayne, let's get into the down at the 1 yard line and didn't score leaderboard. Had 2 instances on Monday Night Football, Noah Brown and Brian Robinson for the Commanders, but certainly plenty throughout the rest of Sunday. Colts quarterback Anthony Richardson stopped at the 1 and then helped Trey Sermon push the ball across on the next play. Khalil Herbert for the Bears had 2 such instances. Aaron Jones, Devin Singletary, Najee Harris, Javonte Williams, both Buccaneers running backs, Carson Steele, Brandon Ayuk, DJ Moore, Kevontae Turpin, Kyle Pitts, and Josh Weil for all those Titans tight end fanatics out there. So really was a sheeshy, performance from a lot of those guys, Dwayne. And I think with Richardson, because we were just kind of talking about him and Jaden Daniels anyway, it is important to note that we are going to get better days on the ground. He has already had a couple of these, sorts of sheeshes this season. I would still, Dwayne, be very hard pressed to see Richardson fall out of the position's top 10, top 12 performers, even if, again, we're not feeling quite as good about that overall QB1 upside as it stands through 3 weeks.
Yeah, we know the overall QB1 upside is a major question because you can't complete 50% of your passes. So that's going to limit you. But again, we've done the research on this. Even terrible passing quarterbacks that have the rushing ability like Anthony Richardson has, we've seen it over time. They average the QB8 finish. They average over 20 fantasy points per game. So you're still going to be fine with Anthony Richardson. It's to your point, Ian. We're probably not getting a top 3 quarterback finish. But I think top 6 is still fully on the table. And let's also just realize the guy could get better, as the season goes on. I know it's looked really terrible out of the gate. We're still only on a 3-game sample here, folks. So we'll still hold out hope for Anthony Richardson. But yeah, I still think he ends up being somebody that you're fine having on your fantasy team in more weeks than not.
We'll note out of those stopped at the 1 yard line and did not score Sheesh's Najee Harris, particularly hurt for overbetters because it happened there around the 2-minute warning. He dragged like 3 Chargers defenders. Like this was not a Devin Singletary where he went down on purpose. Najee was fighting for that end zone, unfortunately finished 1 yard short before Justin Fields kneeled things out the rest of the way. And also on the DJ Moore, man, that was actually a Hail Mary before halftime that he managed to catch. Unfortunately got tackled just short of the goal line and ended up being the difference in that final score as well. So that was the Sheesh Report highlights. I invite you guys to go to FantasyLife.com to check out the full thing for free. Again, just a good way to kind of put a bow on the previous week and then move on to what really matters. And of course, Dwayne, that is the Utilization Report. That was a hot graphic there. Appreciate you guys behind the scenes. But yes, Dwayne, it is time for the utilization report presented by DraftKings. And for those unaware, we are really just trying to get into the core of how players are being used, because if you don't, Dwayne, you could, have some confusing takeaways here, because we live in a world where Jauan Jennings is the overall wide receiver 4, Cole Kmet's the tight end 3, Sam Darnold's the QB 2. Again, fantasy points tell a lot of the story, but we do see some wonkiness when we don't associate, again, the production with the utilization. So kicking things off, we're going to look at a couple upgrades you have, namely a certain, son of a former NFL Hall of Famer. Talk about Marvin Harrison Jr. and what he's done to deserve an upgrade in the old fantasy ranks.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, right? Marvin Harrison Jr., one of the most lauded prospects I can remember at wide receiver. I mean, we just heard so much about him, and he controlled really the narrative all offseason. Well, now we've gotten into the year, and Malik Neighbors has just popped off for these first 3 games, and we thought those 2 guys were really close. Like our supermodel, which scores these players based on traits that mean future fantasy production when they're coming out of college, they graded really closely together. But because Neighbors has been so good, it's almost like Marvin Harrison Jr. is now the afterthought, Ian. And when you really look at it, if we didn't have Neighbors on the scene doing what he's doing, I think we would be hearing even more about Marv. He had that really tough game in week 1. Looked like he had some issues with the way he was running his routes, communicating with Kyler Murray. So there was a little bit of panic. But man, has he really come back over the last 2 games. He's had a 38% and a 31% target share in these 2 games, Ian. So 34% over the 2-game sample. He is absolutely in tune with Kyler Murray, who's given him the deep shots down the field as well. So 70% and 47% of the air yards over these last 2 games. That's really great. And then end zone targets. He's got 75% and 100% over the last 2 games. So in these critical situations, getting the downfield shots, getting the targets in the end zone, and then just overall getting all these targets, Marvin Harrison Jr. is right there with Malik Neighbors over these last 2 games. Now, his utilization score for the season right now is sitting at a 7.5 because we have to take the whole sample. He had a bad week 1. Malik Neighbors did not have a bad week 1. He's had a good week every week. Now, we'll see. Eventually, Malik Neighbors, are you going to have a bad game? Hopefully not. We'll just see what happens with that. But when you look at Marvin Harrison, the utilization score, which also takes talent into account, it is more based on the usage, though, to your point, Ian. It suggests that he would be a high-end wide receiver, too. And so that's where I've got him locked in right now as a high-end wide receiver, too. But realizing that if he really keeps up this trend, and week 1 was just really an aberration, or just kind of an outlier situation, he's going to be a wide receiver 1 within the next game if he puts up another performance like this. So, yeah, if you've got Marvin Harrison Jr., you're feeling absolutely great. I know he was expensive. You had to take him in round 2 of your fantasy drafts, despite the fact that he was only a rookie, but he's showing up right now, 23.2 fantasy points over the last 2 games on average.
I know it's just Tuesday, Dwayne, but have you seen his matchup for this Sunday?
Yeah, it's going to be a big game, Ian. Was he wide receiver 1 this week for all of us?
Why not? Why not, man? If you're playing the Washington Commanders,
Maserati.
You are the wide receiver 1. Maserati Marv. Again, $130, 2 touchdowns in week 2, followed up with 64 yards and a touchdown in week 3. And yeah, man, Kyler's feeding him, but Dwayne, like these guys, once they are truly on the same page, I mean, ceiling might as well be the freaking moon at that point, man, because you've seen it over these past 2 weeks, multiple back shoulder fades, but they're just off, ball going off the very end of Marvin Harrison Jr.'s fingertips. Really could be some even bigger monster games ahead. So thought this note was interesting. Total air yards over the last 2 weeks. First place in the NFL is Marvin Harrison Jr. Second place, Malik Neighbors. And the only other wide receiver with over 300 air yards, Rome Odunze. These teams are letting these young kids eat. And, I think Dwayne and I and all the other fantasy managers appreciate that. Another upgrade, Dwayne, it's going to be Panthers wide receiver 1. Yeah, we can say that now. Jauan Johnson, particularly with Adam Thielen expecting to be sidelined with a hamstring injury. So we saw Andy Dalton going out there doing his thing, and a cool stat from a friend of the show, John Daigle. After Thielen departed in the second half, Deontay registered a 37.5% target share. So Dwayne, 20, 25, 30 targets for Deontay this week. What are we thinking?
Well, I mean, he had a 38% target share on the game period. So I think he was doing pretty good. So Deontay Johnson, yeah, man, he's always been a good target earner. We've talked about it. If you guys have listened to us before, you're probably like, okay, stop talking about Deontay Johnson's target earning ability. Well, the reason you hear us keep repeating it, Ian, is that's the best indicator that you have for how good a wide receiver is, like how talented they are. And it's a major part of the utilization score. So we're looking at targets, we're looking at catchable targets, their target share. There's a lot of components to target earning that go into the score. And Diontae Johnson, man, came out here, Ian, with our first of the season 10.0 utilization score in week 3 for Diontae Johnson. So Diontae Johnson, like, round of applause. The best utilization score you can get is a 10, and he's the first player to do it this season at any position. So it had to be our guy, Ian. Like, I'm so happy that it was Diontae Johnson that got to do this. But look, when we look at Andy Dalton, it's just a massive upgrade. I know it sounds weird because Andy Dalton, if you look now, including last weekend, over his last 15 starts, has averaged a whopping 217 yards per game. But it's still a massive upgrade over what we had with Bryce Young, who is just really struggling. Like, we didn't know if we could get 150 passing yards in a game from Bryce Young. So when you suddenly tack on an extra 60, 75 yards per game, and we know Diontae Johnson's going to be their leading target earner, that now means he's back into the wide receiver 3 conversation. And if Andy Dalton pops off, we know he still has that wide receiver 1 upside. So yeah, I've locked him back into wide receiver 3 territory, and then we'll just move him up or down from there depending on the matchups each week.
I mean, you nailed it, man. Look, the bar was not high moving on from Bryce Young. It's not a short joke. It's kind of a short joke. But yeah, look, he was the worst quarterback in the NFL by any metric out there. So even Andy Dalton getting league average play out of him is going to be a nice boon for everyone in the offense. So again, great performance from Diontae. Could have been even bigger, though. He was highlighted in the Sheesh report because he unfortunately dropped a 6-yard touchdown on a fade on the first possession of the game, and then later got sprung wide open in the back of the end zone from 1 yard out. Unfortunately, pressure up the middle forced Dalton to get the red the ball a little bit quickly, and just kind of sailed it out of bounds, and thus we were sheeshing about it. So could have been even bigger for Diontae, but again, certainly feel great. We're back, Diontae Johnson fantasy managers. Upgrade that guy into your starting lineup in leagues of all shapes and sizes. So as much as we love talking about upgrades, guys, we do have some downgrades to get to. But first, a quick word to our friends over at Paramount Plus. You won't miss a minute of the action when you stream the NFL on CBS Live on Paramount Plus. Stream every local, national, and postseason NFL on CBS game live all the way through the AFC Championship game, only on Paramount Plus. Download Paramount Plus today to start your free trial and unlock a season of epic moments, including all of your local Week 4 games. All right, Dwain, we got some downgrades. And for those that listen to our Sunday night review, which I invite all of you guys to do, we do it live, usually around 8 p.m. Eastern. Always fun getting some people in the chat there as well. But yes, most surprising revelation was none other than Ravens tight end Mark Andrews. 21 total snaps, Dwain. Yeah, he goose-egged, but the fact he wasn't even on the field, this is the concerning part. Because I know in week 1, had a bad game, but he was still out there running routes and everything. We could just kind of chalk it up to a poor evening at the office. But Dwain, big difference between having a bad game when you're on the field and versus having one where, you're suddenly pretty much playing a backup role.
Yeah, and I mean, after the game or yesterday, John Harbaugh really tried to explain it as, well, we want to use certain personnel packages to accomplish certain things in the game. He's talking about running the football, but we're like, okay, but we're talking about on pass plays, man, 35% route participation. We don't have him on the field for a pass play. So some of those are you come out, you're in a run set, defense shows something, you check to a pass play. Well, obviously, if they don't want Mark Andrews on the field for rundowns, that's going to hurt him a little bit in that area. But I feel like there's something bigger going on here, Ian. I don't know if it's tied to the tightrope surgery that he had in the offseason. I don't know if it's performance related, but it's something we're going to have to monitor. But here's what I'm going to say about Mark Andrews. I get it. 35% route participation. Tight end is a complete wasteland, though. You can't release him, in my opinion. I mean, I want your thoughts here. I think you got to keep him on your team. But you do have permission to figure out if you want to start someone else. I mean, if you want to get someone else into your lineup you think's actually going to be on the football field, that would be pretty nice, Ian, if we could get that. Here's the thing. Depending on the matchup each week, you could see the Ravens actually decide they want to throw the ball in a game. And if they do, maybe we are going to see more Mark Andrews. So it's a really tricky spot for fantasy managers. I'm leaning the fact that Andrews is still a young player. He's coming off of an injury. He's been a top 6 tight end, for the last 4 to 5 years on a points per game scale. So he's not a guy that we think is probably completely washed. Is he off to a slow start? Yeah, we definitely have to recognize that. So the names I would start to think about, okay, would you rather start someone like a Tyler Conklin that is going to be out there 85, 90% of the routes? Aaron Rodgers is looking really good right now. I don't blame someone, Ian, if they want to bench Mark Andrews for that. But just know Tyler Conklin can also just as easily go wrong. He can just give you 3 or 4 points because Aaron Rodgers could just spread it around to the other guys, and we know Garrett Wilson's going to get his targets. But I think if you're trying to find someone that you would replace Mark Andrews with, like, you have to find one of these guys that's, obviously on the field more, and you can find all that in the utilization report. But I'm not releasing Mark Andrews. I have a feeling that this is going to change as the season goes.
I would, echo that sentiment. Just please don't completely overreact. If you want to bench him for a week or two while we figure things out, that's fine. But just the state of the position as a whole, Dwain, like if there's even a 10% chance that we get back to seeing the usual top 5 producer, Mark Andrews, to me, that is well worth a bench stash right now. Because again, David Njoku, Evan Ingram, now Sam Laporta and Trey McBride, so many of these guys are hurt in the first place that as much as we might not love Mark Andrews and guys like Kyle Pitts' production, again, once you sit down, you actually have to start ranking the players at the position. Yeah, you all of a sudden find out that it's tough to drop them too far down the ranks, but a drop is deserved nonetheless because, Dwayne, Will Dissly, more fantasy points than Mark Andrews this season. That's the type of world we're living in at the moment. Another downgrade we need to get to, expected, but also notable, these Dolphins wide receivers. Now, we could see a quarterback change in Miami. Obviously, they signed former Pro Bowl quarterback Tyler Snoop Huntley last week, just wasn't quite ready to be active for that game. That said, Dwayne, I went back and pulled Huntley's, passing yards in his, 11 or 12 career starts, and he has cleared 225 yards. I should say cleared 226 yards exactly one time. So 10 to 8, career touchdown to interception ratio. Look, the whole Pro Bowl thing is like a joke. I continue to just have no idea how that happened in our society that is allegedly, governed by people with important jobs and stuff. But yeah, Snoop Huntley made a Pro Bowl. I don't get it. I still don't. It upsets me. All right, Dwayne. Anyway, back to these Dolphins. Yeah, go ahead.
No, you do realize quarterbacks don't matter, right? It's all coaching now. That's where we're at. Now you just need a coach. If you have a coach, you can turn Malik Willis into an absolute Pro Bowl player. Hat tip to LaFleur, doing some really great things here, guys. But are we not forgetting that Skylar Thompson just completely bombed with Mike McDaniel and these 2 wide receivers? The quarterback still matters. Can we keep it in the middle somewhere, guys? Do we have to take every narrative to such an extreme? Anyway, Hartitz, on with your point.
Oh, no, I was pretty much done. I love what you're saying, though, about the system QBs. I saw a funny joke about, Brock Purdy, and they were like, yeah, well, can Brock Purdy do it without Jauan Jennings out there, So it really is a joke with what we got going on. But anyway, long story short, Dwayne, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, got to be moving them down the ranks.
Yeah, we already downgraded them last week, but I think, this is the reality of what the floor can look like. And we talked about that the floor is so much lower with these other quarterbacks in there, and the ceiling is so much lower. So really, like, everything is shifting on us. So I think everyone, to your point, knows, Ian, we don't need to waste a lot of time on it. We're downgrading these guys. And just so, like, the nutshell here is Tyreek Hill downgrades to mid-range wide receiver 2, and I've moved Jalen Waddle to wide receiver 4. You don't even need to have him in lineups if you don't have to. But the question is, for fantasy managers, you have Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. What do you do? I would be willing to sell, even if that means selling what we would call, not sell high, sell low. I'm willing to sell low right now on Tyreek Hill. I had a friend of mine reach out yesterday and said, hey, somebody offered me DK Metcalf and David Montgomery for Tyreek Hill. I just said, yes. DK Metcalf looks good right now. He's going to probably be a wide receiver 2 the rest of the year. David Montgomery, is outscoring Jahmyr Gibbs. We don't want to talk about it, but he's probably still a running back 2, right? The rest of the season. Those are players that you get right now. We don't know for sure what's going to happen with Tua. We can only speculate. There's a lot of ways that this thing plays out. Ian, what if the Dolphins, by the time Tua is ready to come back, what if his timeline is not 4 weeks? What if it's 6 weeks and the Dolphins don't win a game between now and then? Is Tua playing? Is he playing the rest of the season? And we don't know the answer, but it's a question you have to ask yourself. There's a downside here where we don't have any of these quarterbacks. Maybe Tyler Huntley is actually good enough to be a system quarterback and can boost Tyreek Hill. But here's what I can say. He's not going to be Tua. He is not going to be good enough to give you the opportunity to have these 300, 350 passing yard games where both of these guys can blow up. So my main point would be I would be willing to move on. Ian, here are some trades that I saw for Tyreek Hill that have happened in the last 2 days. Probably not getting this first one now after I wrote this before Monday night, and we said Jamar Chase was going to blow up. He was traded straight up for Jamar Chase twice, but it still gives you an idea of where people's minds are on Tyreek Hill. Rashee Rice 2 times. Chris Olave. I would take Chris Olave straight up right now for Tyreek Hill. Some people say, hey, you're being too aggressive, but the problem is I think Chris Olave is a really good player in the best offense of his life. Like, I think we're hoping Tyreek Hill can be Chris Olave without Tua. If you get Tua back later, yeah, maybe you win that trade. But we could also have, Tyreek Hill putting up complete duds, giving you wide receiver 4 performances. Waddle has been traded straight up for Chris Olave. Yes, please. He's been traded twice for J.K. Dobbins. Yes, please. He's been traded straight up for DJ Moore. Yes. T. Higgins. Yes. I'm taking all of those players over Waddle. So my point being, you need to adjust like your values around these players. And if you can get out from under them, don't give them away. But I'm very willing right now to move on, and I think anybody that has them on the roster really needs to be thinking it through.
Again, shout out fantasycalc.com for some of those real life trades going on. Hey, Dwayne, you know what? Even if you are dealing with some sharper league mates who are trying to say no, maybe send them a screenshot of those actual trades that happened. Maybe that'll help get you across the finish line. One more downgrade we got to get to. Sadly, an injury-induced one. Steelers running back Jaylen Warren got an MRI on his knee on Monday. We'll wait to hear those results. But yeah, Dwayne, he was out there, not exactly looking great. And accordingly, Mike Tomlin pulled him in the second half after realizing that, again, Warren did not seem to be using his, just looking as spry as usual. So again, Warren's banged up. Najee Harris was also in a sling. Haven't exactly gotten word on that. But yeah, it's a situation where we've talked about the upside of the Steelers offense and for Justin Fields himself being very good news for, again, Justin Fields fantasy managers. But when you do add in a offensive coordinator like Arthur Smith, who's not necessarily dead set on featuring one single player at any position, with a dual threat quarterback who is going to factor into the run game and not be as prone to check the ball down, yeah, it's not good for the running backs, especially when they're injured.
I have a solution for all of this. Arthur Smith wants to play his backups. So for his next stop in the NFL, can we just put him somewhere like the Patriots? Then he could just play with backups all game and feel great about it. Do we have to put George Pickens through this? Do we have to put Jaylen Warren through this? Do we have to put these players like we did it with Drake London, Bijan Robinson, Kyle Pitts? I mean, these should be some of the better names in fantasy football. And we continue to have to put these good players through this Arthur Smith experience. So let's just get Arthur Smith on the worst offensive teams in the league. He can prove to his dad that he can do it, and he can get that affection that he needs. And then we don't have to worry about it, right, as fantasy football managers. But when you look at Jaylen Warren, Ian, yeah, he's downgraded to running back 5 status. I'm not dropping him in most formats. You play in an 8-team league with 14 roster spots, Jaylen Warren's out of there. Like, you're cutting him. You're done. You play in a 10-teamer that maybe has 16, 17 spots, I'm probably still keeping him. 12-team leagues, I'm keeping him because he's a really good player. And now we have the Najee Harris injury news. We don't know for sure what's up with Jaylen Warren. Was it a tweak to the hamstring injury that he entered the season with, that he injured late in preseason? We don't know for sure. We don't have that information. We'll be monitoring it today. But for Jaylen Warren, we know the talent's there, Ian, but it is a bad situation. And essentially, we're now at the point where when we drafted Jaylen Warren, we thought, okay, he might have standalone value in an offense that's going to run the ball all the time. Maybe they split the carries, but they haven't been doing that. Even with Warren healthy, most of the rushing attempts have all been going to Najee. Jaylen Warren getting the passing down reps. And to your point, what are those worth? Justin Fields is just going to take off. Justin Fields is going to scramble. So right now, Jaylen Warren in a really bad spot in fantasy land.
Again, you go from one of the most checked down prone quarterbacks in the league from Russell Wilson to one of the least in Justin Fields. Accordingly, not great news for your pass catching back in Pittsburgh. So again, those were the big 3 downgrades, Dwayne, but plenty of more. Floor is yours, Dwayne. Rapid fire upgrades and downgrades from the Utilization Report.
Yeah, so Chris Godwin upgrades again, Ian. Like, he's now getting into that wide receiver 1 conversation. Absolutely loving life, playing from the slot 65% of the time. This guy's a 31% target share. So if you have Chris Godwin, don't be thinking it's going to go away. I think you're in a really good spot. So at a minimum, a high-end wide receiver 2. Then whenever we look at Rashee Rice, Ian, I know we talked about him a little bit off the top, but oh my God, this dude is just absolutely dominating the target share for the Chiefs. Him and Patrick Mahomes completely locked in. He moves to mid-range wide receiver 1 status. The utilization score is absolutely popping for this guy. A couple of quick downgrades for you. DeAndre Swift, Ian. They gave him a chance. Now, I don't know how good of a chance it is. I mean, it's the Bears, the play calling suspect. The offensive line play has had its own challenges. So I don't know how much of this we can even put on Swift. But the bottom line is the coaching staff is now searching. And we saw the utilization take a downturn this last weekend. So I think the door is ajar for someone like Jauan Johnson, who got his first playing time of last week, or potentially even Khalil Herbert in the future, to really turn this into that 2 to 3 way committee in an offense where we can't afford it. or maybe eventually just outright take the job away from him. So DeAndre Swift now downgrading into that running back 4 territory. And then the final name here, Zamir White. We tried, guys. We tried last week. He had the matchup. They were favored. He had the utilization from the week before. And guess what? None of it matters because he's still Zamir White. And what the Raiders are doing with their running backs, it's all over the board. We can't predict it right now. So he just can't be near your fantasy lineups. He downgrades to running back 4 territory despite being the guy. And you pointed it out so correctly, Ian. He was a bad profile to be buying on, despite being the guy that the coaches told us, no, we're really going to lean on him. Then we saw in the preseason, maybe not. Him and Alexander Madison really mixing it up. Preseason utilization gave us some pause, and now in these first 3 games, that's just carrying through. So Zamir White, downgrade.
But Dwain, that picture, he looks so jacked. What happened? Why did that not translate?
He's the new Mike Davis. Yeah.
Sadly, who could have seen that coming? Well, I guess we did. But last point, Dwain, we did hear from Antonio Pierce that, business decisions were being made on the field, so he's going to make some now. I don't know that was made in reference to Zamir White, but deeper leagues, do we just throw Alexander Madison on the bench for 1 game? Because I feel like there's a usage shakeup coming with the Raiders right now.
I mean, I guess the Raiders' offense has been better than we thought it would be, right? They've got some playmakers. So
and if you're throwing the ball to Madison, if he starts getting all the rush attempts, I mean.
Yeah, we did see Amir Abdullah came in this trail. It's their first real trailing game strip. He came in and took the 2-minute offense and all that stuff. So I think you're still going to have a little bit of a mix. But to your point, yeah, if you get a comment like that from the coaching staff, we've already seen this weird utilization anyway. Yeah, I mean, there's a chance Alexander Madison takes this role. So I would qualify that. You're in a deeper league, right? If you're playing in a 12-teamer and you guys have got 18, 20 roster spots, a guy like Alexander Madison can probably make it on your team. Playing on an 8-teamer with 14 roster spots, you're just going to kind of wait and see what happens with the Raiders backfield.
We'll get into our waiver wire section next, talking about guys like Bucky Irving. But Dwain, I mean, I know some of the leagues worrying, man. Bucky Irving isn't on that waiver wire. So guys like Madison, Isaac Guerrero, not the worst deep bench stashes, even if it is just for a week. But before we get to that, guys, a quick word to our friends over at DraftKings. Hey everyone, with the football season kicking off, it is the perfect time to dive into the action with our partners over at DraftKings, the #1 place to bet on touchdowns. And right now, all new customers who bet $5 will instantly get $250 in bonus bets, plus get 1 month of NFL Plus Premium on us. That is something we can all celebrate. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app today and sign up using our promo code FANTASYLIFE. The crown is yours. And stay in on the action and use your $250 in bonus bets to bet anytime touchdowns on DraftKings. After all, DraftKings is the place to bet touchdowns. If sports betting is not yet available in your state, don't worry. You can still join in on all the fun with DraftKings Daily Fantasy and have the shot to win cash prizes. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. New customers use our promo code FANTASYLIFE and bet just $5 on any wager to get $250 in bonus bets instantly. That's promo code FANTASYLIFE only at DraftKings Sportsbook. Time for our waiver wire watch, Dwain. It is the utilization report presented by DraftKings, and kicking things off with the wide receiver 4 on the season. That's right, more fantasy points than Justin Jefferson. Of course, we're talking about Jauan Jennings of the 49ers. Dwain, on a scale from, I guess, Richie James going off for like 180 on that one random Thursday night game to Justin Jefferson, where do you put Jauan Jennings, performance in terms of expecting it to happen even close to again in 2024?
It's Richie James. I mean, Jauan Jennings has had this opportunity before, but before I get into that, I want to give a hat to Jauan Jennings. He came out, he earned a 9.9 utilization score. We just talked about Deontay Johnson being the first 10 of the season. So Jauan Jennings was right there as a wide receiver, and he played really good. Like, we watched the film, Ian, the dude had some crazy catches, and he was in perfect, sync with Brock Purdy. So it was a situation where when you watch it, you're like, man, Jauan Jennings balled out. He had shown some progress last year in the playoffs, becoming that guy inside the 10-yard line that really Brock Purdy wanted to look for. So we're not saying that Jauan Jennings is just a terrible player, but whenever we look at it, and reality really sets in, Ian, and we think about what you just said, what's the chances, right, we really get anything near this in these coming weeks? I would say that it's really low. And there's a couple reasons why. Number one, George Kittle and Deebo Samuel, if we get one of them back this week, well, those targets are going away from Jauan Jennings. Yeah. We also have Brandon Ayuk, who was a hold-in just now, probably getting up to speed and getting into, a situation where Brock Purdy trusts him. But Brandon Ayuk is clearly the better wide receiver than Jauan Jennings. And eventually, you're going to have the entire offense back healthy. So even if you go get Jauan Jennings, let's say you want to put a lot of fab on him, it doesn't make sense, even if he's this good, Ian, because he's eventually going to be crowded back out of the offense. Number two, he's also most likely not this good. We have a sample here of him on the field since 2021 without these players. And up until this past weekend, Ian, plays without Deebo Samuel and George Kittle, he's had a 17% target share. Last weekend, it was 40%, guys. Okay, plays without Deebo Samuel, which is a larger sample size, 13% target share. Plays without George Kittle back to 2021, a 7% target share. This is a random event. This is a random as random gets kind of event. Do not go blow your fab on this player. Do not go out here and fall into this trap. If you have Deebo Samuel, if you have George Kittle on your roster, I'm actually a tad more intrigued in that situation, Ian, because we have seen he can at least put up a spike game. It's not going to be another one like this where he gives you this many points, but he might be able to come through with 12 to 15 fantasy points, and it might be better than your next option on the waiver wire if you play in a deep league. So it's not a situation where I'm saying you absolutely can't bid on Jauan Jennings, but don't fall into the trap of overbidding. I would say 5 to 10% max on Jauan Jennings if you're playing in a FAAB league. If you're sitting in a league where it's more of an order of a waiver wire claim out there, and you've got Bucky Irving available, you've got Sam Darnold available, you've got Braylon Allen available, I'm taking all those players over Jauan Jennings. So just keep it all in mind. Hat tip to the player. Absolute fantastic game, Jauan Jennings, by you, but most likely not to happen again, Ian.
And again, worth remembering, Dwain, on top of everything you said, which is true, they played the Rams, okay? Jameson Williams, Marvin Harrison Jr., Jauan Jennings, all three of these guys going absolutely off on one of the worst defenses in football. Don't be surprised again if the Rams and Commanders, we continue to see all sorts of fantasy points going to whoever is lined up across from them. Another waiver wire darling, Dwain, is Buccaneers RB Bucky Irving, who got a nice little endorsement from head coach Todd Bowles, noting on Monday that, again, Bucky Irving has earned more snaps going forward. And why not, Dwain? Number 2 in the NFL with 6.2 yards per carry among 34 qualified running backs. Meanwhile, Rachaad White all the way down there in 33rd. So talk about Bucky and if he can be more than just a high-end handcuff at this point.
Yeah, so with Irving, the utilization, we saw the flip this last weekend. Ian, he had 56% of the rushing attempts, and we did talk about it on Sunday night. So you guys have got to come listen to that. That's available also first thing on Monday morning. Maybe you have one of these leagues where you can do waiver wire moves earlier. We get those messages sometimes. That's a great show for you guys because you're going to be ahead of the news. Before any of these reports broke anywhere else around Bucky Irving and what had happened, we had it on that show. So looking at Irving, if he's going to get half of the rushing attempts or more, that moves him alone into that running back 4 conversation. But I think the bigger picture here around Bucky Irving and why he needs to be a priority, this guy is sitting out there right now, Ian, in over 65% of Yahoo leagues. So in a lot of you that are listening to this, watching this, you're actually in a position where you can go get this player. The bigger thing here is he was actually a good receiver in college, Ian. And so Rachaad White last weekend continued to stay on the field. He had a 73% snap share. But what we heard yesterday from the coaching staff for the Buccaneers was a lot of that was driven by the passing down work because they were trailing in a trailing game script. And so Rachaad White had a 73% snap share, handled 58% of the routes. So there's just so many data points here, Ian. We heard about it all offseason. They had a checklist they wanted Rachaad White to get through to be able to stay in his same role. They drafted Bucky Irving. And then in the preseason, we saw Bucky Irving playing good. He carved out more playing time. And then now Rachaad White's doing what he has already over the first 2 years, which is being inefficient. So there's also this opportunity that within the next 2 to 3 weeks, we just see Bucky Irving as the lead back period for the Buccaneers. Yeah. And if that happens, we like this offense, man. I mean, Bucky Irving could suddenly be, I know it sounds weird, but he could be in the running back 1 conversation. So he upgrades now to running back 4 territory. He can get into your flex spot. He can help you out in a pinch on a bye week, but could very quickly be running back 3, running back 2. He is the number 1 waiver wire ad of the week. He should be your priority.
Dwayne, we talked about a wide receiver, a running back. Now, how about for those tight end needy rosters out there? Tyler Conklin, someone who all the way last Thursday night certainly put forward his best performance of the season.
Yeah, and with Conklin, we mentioned him just earlier, whenever we talked about, Mark Andrews. But the big thing here, Aaron Rodgers looking really good, looking comfortable in that offense. Yeah. But 90% route participation, Ian. And if we go back and we look at data since 2011, players that have had an 80% plus route participation at tight end that have been even like 15 to 17% targets per route run, which is what we're at for Tyler Conklin over the last 3 seasons. He's at 17%. Those guys have on average finished as a low-end tight end 1, scoring 10.3 fantasy points per game. So Tyler Conklin looking more like a low-end tight end 1 than the low-end tight end 2 where a lot of people think about him. He's on the field, playing with a quarterback we like, and if he just gets back to his historical performance, which isn't great, but it's good enough, he's going to be someone that can help you out as a tight end 1.
Again, dire times at the tight end position calls for, dire solutions. And I think Tyler Conklin does fit the bill there. Dwayne, before we get out of here, let's do another rapid fire segment with some of your buy lows and sell highs. Talk to me about the likes of J.K. Dobbins, Garrett Wilson, and yes, even Rome Odunze. You better have a good reason to sell high on, Dwayne, because I thought we had something there, man.
Yeah, so if you guys read the utilization report, I put these things really in order. Number 1 is Bucky Irving this week. Number 2 would have been J.K. Dobbins. The only thing keeping me, holding me back a little bit here, Ian, from him being at the very top of the list this week of your actionable takeaways is the fact that we've got Joe Alt injured. He's probably going to miss next week. That's their starting left tackle, the rookie they drafted this year. And then we've got Rashawn Slater with a pec injury, and we've got Justin Herbert with a high ankle sprain. So that's a little challenging. You're going to play the Chiefs the next week, but overall, the takeaway here for J.K. Dobbins, even though he came down in the box score, we saw his best utilization of the season in, meaning he could now be the full-time number 1 running back for the Chargers. And if we seeing the efficiency that we've had from him, that could make him a mid-range running back 1. We're going to have to get past these injuries, though. So don't go overboard because the health of this offense is not where we want it to be. But still, I do believe J.K. Dobbins is a buy.
Also, Garrett Wilson, someone who maybe hasn't been putting up the biggest numbers just yet, Dwayne, but Aaron Rodgers looking good. And so is Wilson's target share, despite, again, the somewhat lackluster box scores.
Yeah, man, you just hit it. I mean, he's sitting at a 29% target share. Aaron Rodgers has said the first 3 teams have been rolling all the coverage to Garrett Wilson. Guys, getting a 29% target share playing against like a Commanders cornerback all alone is hard. Look, you can play one of the worst cornerbacks in the league in single coverage, and it's hard to get a 29% target share. It just is. You're talking about a guy getting a 29% target share despite they're giving him all of this additional attention, and we've seen all the near just misses. Same thing that you talked about with Kyler and Marv, Ian. There's just these little bitty things, the back shoulder fade timing. There's some things that are just slightly off. Garrett Wilson in motion moving up the field before he takes off from the line of a scrimmage on what could have ended up being a touchdown type play. So Garrett Wilson very close, much closer to being a mid-range wide receiver 1 than where he currently sits in fantasy. So absolute buy low.
Buying low on Dobbins and Garrett Wilson, but according to you, Mr. McFarland, selling high on Rome Odunze. Is just because Keenan Allen could be back sooner rather than later?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things here. Look, I said I'm willing to sell high on Rome Odunze. I don't want you to force it because we want these young, talented players on our roster. Caleb Williams at least flashed the ability and threw for over 300 yards last week. It was crazy looking. If you go back and watch it, guys, he's scrambling for his life. We would like to see something that looks more like a normal offense. But with Rome Odunze, yeah, we're going to potentially get Keenan Allen back soon. We've got a coordinator in Shane Waldron we don't like. We've got a rookie quarterback, despite the fact he had a big week last week. Like, is a performance like that sustainable? There's a lot of questions around the Bears, and that's enough that if you can sell on Rome Odunze, as someone that scored 24 fantasy points last week, and you can get something that you feel is a more secure asset, then yeah, I'm willing to do that. But again, guys, don't force it. We love Rome Odunze. He's a very talented wide receiver, and there's a chance like Caleb does just click. If Caleb's suddenly throwing for 250 yards per game and Keenan Allen's hill is really something that links back to last year and he just continues missing time, Rome Odunze is going to move very quickly from being a boom bust wide receiver 4, that's what he upgraded to this week, to being a wide receiver 3, maybe even a wide receiver 2. So don't give him away, but I understand if you want to sell high after this big performance in week 3.
Bears get the Rams, Panthers, Jaguars, and Commanders over these next 4 weeks. So please, Caleb, please, for everyone out there, mostly, producer swing, we're begging you to keep that going. So that's going to wrap up this edition of the Fantasy Life Show, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow, myself, Dwayne, and Chris Allen, breaking down the biggest questions ahead of week 4. So yeah, otherwise, best of luck on those waiver wire streets, and make sure you give the utilization and Sheesh reports a read over at FantasyLife.com. So for Dwayne, for producer Kelsey, for producer Matt, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning to the Fantasy Life Show, and until next time, take care, everybody.